It's a cliche, but listening is the most important thing. Listening takes in so much. Listening involves not just using our ears, but we use the word listening to convey a deep, abiding presence that we have with each other. This presence involves our capacity and our ability as human beings to be with each other and to share life together. The levels and dimensions of that, of the emotional capacity, for example, of the feeling capacity, of the sensate capacity, of the sensual capacity, of how we use all of our abilities and capacities, and how these combine and define the uniqueness of each of our relationships with each other, with the people in our lives, is amazingly profound. Part of this attending and listening is really being able to grow in this skill and ability, this capacity to be able to identify strengths and to be able to pick up on the needs of the other person, to at some level genuinely desire in heart and in our gut, in our soul, the best for the other person is a rare trait in today's world that you might be able to count the number of people that you've met in your lifetime who have this genuine capacity to want the best for you and who would go out of their way to help you, to be with you, to just make your life a little bit easier in whatever way that might be. And it could be as simple as being able to share a smile or hold a hand, or it could be complex in relation to work or lifestyle or needs or a situation or crisis that you found yourself in. And you can turn to that person because they've been for you and with you over time. And you've got a sense you can trust them. And you do, and can work out. And it can be amazing when we have those kinds of experiences. Well, I'm here to tell you, I guess, in this training program that really there's a set of skills and abilities that we can develop within ourselves and in our professional skills as direct support workers, as therapists, as companions on the journey of life with the people that we care about. So these concepts are work specific, but my gosh, they're so universal and so pertinent to all of our relationships. How to put aside your ideas, your expectations, and your preconceptions is a difficult question. Part of the trick here is to open ourselves up to a new experience that we may have not thought of in quite this way before. And just let me guide you through this, because we can often stop ourselves up by simply thinking this is too hard. I'll just put this in the too hard basket for the moment and look for another way of doing this. But just stay with me for a sec and you'll see how interesting, how dynamic and fun this can be at some levels. So to set aside your roles and the demands on your responsibilities is also extremely difficult. We pride ourselves, don't we, on being responsible. We pride ourselves on being able to form strong ideas about what needs to be done and what should and should not be done in life. But at some stage, these expectations and this internalized training that we've given ourselves to be the best at what we do can stop us up from some important abilities that I'm going to open up with you today. to open the mind and heart to new ways of perceiving. Wow, that would be exciting, wouldn't it? We're going to explore that today, to create the space to see and feel things that you may not normally see and feel is part of what we're really getting at here. And how would we identify another person's strengths, to identify our own strengths initially? To accomplish these things, we need to try to make a change internally in ourselves. I'm suggesting what you need to do is try to find a state of intensive curiosity. A curiosity that is intense and focused. To find a state of intense curiosity, some of us would naturally think about a childhood love or a fascination or an interest that we have in life. I remember one of my clients was a young man who was fascinated with frogs. And at different times in my life, I've thought about frogs and I've been curious about them, particularly one particular day when I found a frog under an extremely compacted area of ground next to the foundation of the house. And this frog had obviously been living there suspended in a suspended animation for many years since the foundation of the house had been put in. This area had never been dug up since that time, and this was well over 40 years since the house was built. That blew my mind and made me more fascinated with frogs. Anyway, when I met this client, I wasn't so into frogs. But I brought myself back to that fascination and to other times in my life during my early years, particularly when I was really interested and curious about this topic. And I amplified those experiences internally and got myself really interested in the area. And you know what? That interest helped me enormously to make a bridge with that client and to communicate with that client. I explored frogs with the client and on my own to learn more about this area and increase my curiosity into that area. So that's just one example in my own experience. So what I'm suggesting is think of something that you've been curious about yourself over the years. Really give some time to that again and explore it. Take some time to actually re-explore the area that you're interested in. It could be your own interest here, just to access that state of curiosity. Because it's the state of curiosity that we want to be able to shift and apply to the person that you're working with. And so when we do that, we have a deep sense of curiosity mixed with a person-centered compassion. And these qualities together combine within us, and we sustain an ability to attend to be present to the individual, and to be curious, deeply curious, and caring about what that person is into in their life, what their interests are, what their abilities are. You know, how do they go about their day and their night? How do they live? What's their lifestyle? What's their sense of culture? What are their deeper values that might be expressed in their behaviors? All of these different layers bring up new questions and new insights and new levels of curiosity that enable us to continue a journey of getting to know an individual. And it's a lifelong journey. We discover and we form a much deeper relationship to the person through coming to know them, don't we? And over time, that ability to know the person is formed partly by our curiosity and our compassion, our patience, our willingness to be with them, our giving our time, our consideration, and spending that time with them. So once we amplify our state of curiosity, we apply that state of being to our client, to the person. And our curiosity gives attention, time, and consideration. Now, within that state of curiosity, what I'm suggesting is write out a list of strengths. Write out a list of strengths of the individual, and you might apply that deep, abiding curiosity, that respectful curiosity, to a range of categories that you can think about that might help you to explore and to build this list of strengths of the individual. You might think, for example, of personality traits or of personal traits and interests. You might think about communication abilities. For example, how the person expresses their ideas, how they express themselves, even if they're nonverbal, they will be expressing themselves in many different ways. And often a clinician, especially, who isn't involved in a day-to-day support role, may not pick up on the ways that an individual actually communicates in the everyday. Doesn't have to be a nonverbal person here, but because you're working with an individual on a daily basis, you form deeper understandings. You form a more detailed understanding of who that person is. So part of the giftedness of that really is that you can learn to articulate the ways that you understand lived experience with the person, and you can communicate that to a behavior specialist like me, or to another disability or direct support worker who comes on staff, and you can communicate more readily these things when you think through them, when you're able to write them down, to articulate them, to think through them. You can communicate that more easily with other people. You might think about the person's receptive ability to receive communication. How do they receive communication? What ways do they need things to be said, for example, in simple, short sentences? Or are they more interested in using words when they're related to certain topic areas that they're very interested in, for example? People have many different ways of receiving information. Does the information need to be more pictorial, more in pictures? Or are they able to hear words and verbal language easily? Or is that difficult when they're in certain moods? Or when they're feeling certain ways? Or when they're dealing with certain challenges through the day? Communication can vary then from time to time. Morning, afternoon, and evening can be varied experiences. And again, you're working with the person during those periods of time gives you a unique perspective that is important to realize. And the perspective may not be shared or picked up by another person. Even a professional like an occupational therapist, for example, may benefit from your describing these experiences. And that gives them new insights, and they will look and explore, given what you've shared with them in their practice of curiosity and of clinical assessment that they engage in. So there's a long list here of different category areas that you can explore to look at strengths. Interests enjoyed. What does the person enjoy doing? What do they enjoy experiencing? What activities are they engaged in? What are their preferred activities versus activities that they don't like as much? That's a really important area, because preferred activities gives us a very strong indication of a person's interests and also of their capacities. What people does the person enjoy being around and being with? What relationships to food do they have? What are their likes and dislikes with food, and how is that expressed? And how does that relate to their personality? How does their experience of food relate to their relationships in their daily life? What are their downtime choices, and how do they choose to relax? How are they around personal care tasks, and and the different areas there in self-care and body care, in hygiene, for example. What is their community access like? What are their interests in engaging in the wider community, and how do they engage? What kind of supports do they need during those times of engaging in community, and how does that help them? What are their daily activities, and what are their enjoyments through that process? What is their sleep time like, and their nighttime routines? What are they like? Does that give you any other indications of strengths? And morning routines, afternoon and evening routines are all really important to look at. So now, once we've identified strengths, and you've written these down, start thinking about the individual's needs. But I just wanted to point out that we have potentially here a pretty long list of strengths that could be a full page or 2 pages of information related to an individual that shows your depth of understanding of that person and their strengths. And we're just talking about their strengths at the moment. And that's really important because it is so valuable. It's a person-centered reflection. When we can understand an individual's strengths, we're not so focused on behaviors of concern. And the more that we know about strengths, the more that it puts behaviors of concern in their proper context, because a behavior concern is just one area, and it happens within the context of a person's overall life. And if we just focus on the problem, we're often going to miss that context. We're going to also miss the solutions, the potential solutions, because I almost guarantee that in many, many situations, the behavioral concern is often resolved by understanding the person's strengths and their overall context and the ways that we support that person in their life. So, strengths next to needs. When we identify the person's needs, we go through the same process of curiosity, of compassionate understanding, of attention to and giving quality time and quality attention to the individual. These are so important. We can then identify the individual's needs. We have their strengths. We build a list of their needs. We see the needs in the context of the person's strengths. And my gosh, we have a more person-centered, holistic perspective then, don't we, of the person and their context, the person and their life as more of a whole. And we haven't gotten this from book knowledge. We're not getting this from a clinical assessment per se. If a clinician is worth their weight, they will engage in this holistic process as an initial stage of their assessment. For me, people often ask, what's the first thing that you develop or look at when you're doing a behavior support plan? And I answer, my first step is to identify the person's strengths. People go, oh, I wouldn't have thought that. I would have thought you'd read the reports and look at their diagnosis and their medical history. And well, I do all of that. But, I quarantine that in a certain stage in my process. I quarantine those issues because the person's diagnosis and clinical history can give me a very particular perspective on the person. And it's not always positive. It depends how you read that, how you interpret that. As a clinician, I have learned to read and interpret those reports with a grain of salt, because what is most important for me is how does that clinical diagnosis, the history, the intensive understanding, clinical understanding of the person's needs, how does that relate to the person's strengths and to their overall life context? And it's understanding that person-centered perspective that sheds light on the clinical diagnosis. The clinical diagnosis then gives a certain amount of information to help understand how do we support the person. So then there's a holistic circle happening between those bodies of knowledge. You see what I mean? So the disability support worker in the day-to-day world is implementing behavior support in that holistic space. And you're taking information from other practitioners, specialists, medical doctors also, and you're forming that into a way of support. You're forming that into the support model, which must be holistic, must be person-centered and focused on strengths and actual needs assessment. And the needs assessment is important. This involves your understanding from your perspective of how you see and hear and feel and experience the actual needs of the person in day-to-day life, and how that relates back to your sense of that person and their strengths and their abilities and the ways that they then need support. If you think of disabilities, we're really talking about the ways that an individual needs support to compensate for and enable that individual to function in the day-to-day world in ways that they need support around them, because those disabilities give them those needs, gives them those contexts in which your support role becomes very important. So I'm curious how you develop your list of strengths and your list of needs in relation to the client that we're looking at now. And later on, once you've done that, I want you to go over to the behavior support plan and look at how I have developed an area discussing strengths, interests, likes and dislikes, and the individual's needs and their case history. And this gives a more holistic picture of the individual from my point of view. You can compare your list of strengths and needs to how I've developed that in the behavior support plan. And I'm be very curious to know how you see that, how you put that together. Are there areas that I've missed? If there is, I'd really like to hear about that and to learn about those areas, because this is so important. It will increase the quality of the behavior support plan. Potentially, your insights could help in that way, and your insights could then obviously translate to helping other support workers to get an insight that they may not have had as well. An incredibly important process here. But I'd say at the base of all of this is your relationship with the person. Your relationship of support with that person is based in this compassionate curiosity, this compassionate openness, this ability within you as a support person to adjust almost your way of being in the world today to be for someone else who needs you to be whatever they need you to be. And this is a way that we are able to put ourselves aside. We leave our needs at the door, in a sense. We leave our family problems at the door when we enter into a workplace, and we are there for the other person as much as we possibly can be. We're there for that other person to be what they need us to be in that support role at the moment. Really worth thinking about all of these things. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your insights and feedback.